Greg Biffle's family had barely begun dealing with one of the most heartbreaking tragedies in NASCAR history when someone allegedly entered his empty home and took thousands of dollars, firearms, and pieces of his racing legacy. For months, investigators worked to figure out who was behind the burglary. Now they say they have finally identified the man accused of doing it, and the details surrounding how police connected him to Greg Biffle's home make this case even more disturbing. And this is not simply a story about someone stealing from an empty house. It involves a NASCAR champion who was killed alongside his family, a burglary that happened only weeks later, surveillance evidence, stolen memorabilia, and a separate investigation that could make this case much bigger. So to understand exactly what happened to Greg Biffle's home and how investigators finally got to the suspect, make sure you watch this entire video. Greg Biffle was not just another former NASCAR driver. He was one of the most accomplished drivers of his generation. Biffle won the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series Championship in 2000, then captured the Xfinity Series title in 2002 before moving into the NASCAR Cup Series. At the Cup level, he won 19 races and finished second in the championship standings in 2005 after a 5-win season. His career was so significant that NASCAR named him one of its 75 greatest drivers in 2023. But Biffle's importance to NASCAR went beyond trophies. In the years after Hurricane Helene devastated parts of western North Carolina, he became heavily involved in relief efforts, using his helicopter to reach communities that were difficult to access. He once explained why he continued helping even after the initial emergency had passed. "There's communities over there that we discovered that are just devastated," Biffle said. "The reason why I'm still going is people are still in need." That was the kind of legacy Biffle had built away from the racetrack. And then, on December 18, 2025, everything changed. Biffle, his wife Christina, his 14-year-old daughter Emma, and his 5-year-old son Ryder were aboard a Cessna C-550 business jet that crashed while attempting to return to Statesville Regional Airport in North Carolina. All 7 people aboard were killed. The other victims were Dennis Dutton, his son Jack, and Craig Wadsworth. The aircraft had taken off only minutes earlier before turning back toward the airport. Investigators later confirmed that a passenger sent a text message saying "emergency landing" shortly before the crash. The National Transportation Safety Board opened an investigation, and the full cause of the crash remained under investigation. For NASCAR fans, it was an enormous loss, and the family home in Mooresville, North Carolina, was suddenly sitting without the people who had lived there. Then, only weeks after the crash, something happened that added another layer of pain to an already devastating story. Someone broke into Biffle's home. According to investigators, the burglary occurred overnight between January 7th and January 8th. The suspect reportedly spent an extended amount of time inside the house. Authorities said approximately $30,000 in cash was stolen, along with NASCAR memorabilia and 2 Glock handguns. Later reporting also identified precious metals and other valuable items among the property allegedly taken. Surveillance footage became an important part of the investigation. The video showed a person entering the property late at night and moving through the home. At the time, investigators did not have an arrest. They released surveillance images and asked the public for help identifying the person. For months, the case remained unresolved, but investigators kept working. And now that investigation has produced a major breakthrough. Authorities say Terrell Williams, 44, is the man accused of burglarizing Biffle's home. Williams was already being held in Cobb County, Georgia, on a separate burglary charge. According to the latest reporting, investigators in North Carolina were contacted by Cobb County Police on July 29th with information that helped connect Williams to the Biffle investigation. That connection reportedly led investigators to stolen property associated with Biffle, including NASCAR memorabilia. Some of those items have since been recovered. Williams is now facing multiple felony allegations connected to the Biffle case, including second-degree burglary, safecracking, and money laundering. And investigators say the case may involve more than simply walking into a house and taking whatever was available. Authorities believe Williams used information from media coverage to track when properties were unoccupied. Investigators also believe a radio frequency detector may have been used in an attempt to deal with security systems. That detail is significant because it suggests investigators are looking at the burglary as something that may have involved preparation rather than a completely random break-in. And there is another reason Williams has drawn attention in this investigation. Authorities have linked him to another burglary case in North Carolina, while investigators continue examining whether additional crimes could be connected. An older Iredell County case from 2023 also involved a Terrell Joseph Williams accused in a series of break-ins and thefts at Carolina KTM in Mooresville, where motorcycles and other property were stolen. Because the current investigation is ongoing, authorities will have to establish exactly which prior incidents are connected to the same individual. But the Biffle investigation does not end with the stolen property. Authorities are also looking into suspicious financial activity involving the Biffle family's accounts. Investigators say someone allegedly accessed financial platforms, changed personal information, and redirected funds. There were also allegations involving fraudulent checks connected to Biffle's business. A separate person of interest has been identified in that financial investigation, but authorities have not established that person's direct connection to Williams. That distinction is important, and investigators are still trying to determine how much of the activity may be connected. What makes this entire situation so difficult for NASCAR fans to process is the timing. Greg Biffle had just lost his life, along with his wife and children, in a sudden plane crash. His home was then left behind as part of the family's estate. And less than a month later, someone allegedly entered that home and took money, guns, and items connected to Biffle's racing career. Those NASCAR items were not simply ordinary possessions. They were pieces of the career that made Biffle one of the most respected drivers in the sport. And NASCAR itself described him as more than a champion driver, calling him a fierce competitor, a friend, and someone whose passion and integrity left a lasting impact on the sport. Now, months after the burglary first became public, investigators finally have a suspect facing charges. But legally, it is important to remember that an accusation is not a conviction. Williams remains accused, and the case still has to move through the legal system. There are also unanswered questions about whether other people were involved, whether additional burglaries are connected, and what investigators may ultimately uncover about the separate financial activity. For NASCAR fans, though, this latest development brings at least one major piece of the story into focus. The investigation that began with an empty home, surveillance footage, and stolen pieces of Greg Biffle's legacy has now led authorities to a man they say was responsible. And after everything Greg Biffle and his family went through, this is certainly not the kind of final chapter anyone expected to hear about. Greg Biffle built his legacy through racing, championships, and years of helping people away from the track. That legacy remains. Now, investigators will have to determine exactly how much of what happened inside his home can be tied to Terrell Williams, and whether this case is bigger than the burglary itself. What do you think about this latest development? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and for more NASCAR breaking news, major updates, and stories you won't want to miss, make sure you subscribe to NASCAR Nation News. I'll see you in the next one.